Hello, my name is Travis Newbill with Shambhala Mountain Center, and I'm quite glad to be talking with Andrew Holecek today. Andrew's going to be coming up to the Shambhala Mountain Center land later in the spring, May 17th through the 21st, to lead a Lucid Dream Yoga retreat. Andrew Holecek, in case you're not familiar, has completed a traditional 3-year Buddhist meditation retreat and offers seminars internationally on meditation, lucid dreaming, and dream yoga. He's the author of The Power and the Pain, Preparing to Die, and Meditation in the I Generation, as well as the audio learning course, Dream Yoga, The Tibetan Path of Awakening Through Lucid Dreaming, and his most recent book, which I'm excited to be getting into as soon as I finish my homework, is Dream Yoga, Illuminating Your Life Through Lucid Dreaming and the Tibetan Yogas of Sleep. You may see these articles pop up in the Shambhala Sun, Parabola, Tricycle, Light of Consciousness, Utme Reader. I'm not sure if I said that right. I'm not familiar with that. Anyhow, other periodicals, and Andrew is a familiar voice in contemporary Buddhism, especially around these topics of dream yoga and death and dying, and such a well-respected, great teacher. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, nice to spend some time with you again.
Yeah, my first experience with Andrew was doing a shorter version of a dream yoga retreat with him, 5 years ago now, up at Shambhala Mountain Center. And I'm planning on doing this retreat this spring, which I'm so excited for. Some of you listeners, viewers, may have seen an interview that Andrew and I did previously, a couple of years ago, when he was coming up to do retreat. And I just rewatched it, and I'll say there's a lot of material in there. And so I recommend it alongside this interview. Some of the stuff may come up again, but really deep into the difference between lucid dreaming and dream yoga, the implications for spiritual awakening, how dream yoga can help us with the death process, how it doesn't mess up your sleep, and the daytime component. So a lot of stuff. It's a huge topic, obviously. He's written a good-sized book on it. So that's a maybe too long introduction, but maybe a way into this conversation, Andrew, is by talking about lucid dreaming, which is probably more familiar to most people than dream yoga. And there's a lot of buzz and press around lucid dreaming, especially recently. What might you just say to begin with, talking about lucid dreaming?
Yeah, well, I think you nailed it. There is a lot of buzz these days, and I mean, part of the reason, of course, is ever since lucid dreaming was scientifically proven, it's continued to gain increased traction in the West, because once science gets its mitts on something and substantiates it, then people go off and running. And there's really a lot of promise around that. There's people around the world in sleep labs that are studying lucid dreaming, and some of the scientific reports coming out, the benefits. Honestly, the more I spend time with it, and I'm working on some other books on this topic now, the more I'm blown away by the potentials here. And that's why I'm increasingly talking about lucid dreaming is truly the pedagogy of the future. What I talk about is a night school, a way to engage substantial period of our lives that is otherwise pretty much lost to oblivion. So it's being studied in Germany. The researchers there are showing how lucid dreaming, which of course we should probably quickly define it. Lucid dreaming is, of course, when you wake up to the fact that you're dreaming while still remaining in the dream, sometimes referred to as a hybrid state of consciousness, where the conscious mind can face the unconscious mind directly. And that's one of the reasons it's potentially so transformative, because you are really working with the roots, or I use the analogy of the tectonic plates of your experience. And backstage always runs on stage. What you do with your unconscious mind has a massive influence on your conscious experience. And in fact, researchers have shown that virtually 95% of what takes place in our lives is dictated by unconscious processes. And so by working with this unique state, kind of distilled, refined state of consciousness directly, you have the potential to affect really deep transformation, because you're working with the ground of your experience in that regard. And so, as I was starting to say, in Germany, researchers there are showing how lucidity can be used to increase athletic performance, because what you do with your dream body has a very direct effect on your physical body. But for instance, if you move your dream eyes, you move your physical eyes, which is parenthetically how lucid dreaming was actually scientifically proven. People were able to send a kind of code from the dream state that scientists could measure. If you have a dream orgasm, your physical body can have an orgasm. So that really, truly, it's like a virtual reality lab, that what you do in the dream can affect your body. And you can rehearse physical moves. There's a really compelling video that was just sent to me by some researchers, I believe in Germany, showing a very proficient lucid dreamer literally learning how to play the ukulele almost solely within the context of his lucid dream. So lucidity is shown to transform your physical body using the tenets of neuroscience these days. What's famously being talked about is neuroplasticity. What you do with your mind literally changes your brain. You can affect a great deal of transformation. Physically, there's some very compelling data coming out about how working with your dream body has the potential to even heal your physical body. So it's really quite extraordinary. I mean, we could spend the entire time talking about these sorts of benefits. Part of what I do on this particular upcoming program at SMC is, in fact, go through these voluminous studies, this data, to show people why they might want to be bothered with this practice. Because I think a very common question, almost objection, that I hear is like, well, my life is so busy, why on earth should I be bothered with this stuff? And I simply point out to them that you might want to consider being bothered, because it's a way to really affect psychological transformation, somatic transformation, and within the context of dream yoga, which builds on lucid dreaming, even profound spiritual transformation. And so these are some of the things that we'll be discussing, the incredible benefits of classic lucid dreaming that most people are unaware of, how that matures into dream yoga. They're not quite the same thing. And how that can be taken within the spiritual context as an entire, really complete path, spiritual path in and of itself. So it's very rich material. I mean, and again, the more I dive into it, the more I continue to be stunned by how much is potentially available to us. And in my own experience practicing this stuff for some 40 years, surely it's one reason I'm so passionate about it. I've seen a tremendous benefit in my own life, and that's part of what excites me so much, is my personal experience being substantiated now by science, corroborated by ancient doctrine and the philosophical and religious traditions, all conspiring to really create about a really incredible kind of crucible of potential psycho-spiritual physical transformation. So it's pretty cool stuff.
Indeed. As you're talking about science validating lucid dreaming as something worthwhile, I'm reminded of maybe the way that scientific community has validated mindfulness, or
substantiated it. Yeah, exactly.
What some of I've heard Buddhist teachers say is that's really great, and also to see that mindfulness is one aspect of meditation, and hatha yoga is one aspect of a larger system of being and awakening and working with ourselves. And do you see lucid dreaming as do you see a similarity there?
Yeah, I do. Interesting you would say that, because I mean, if if I'm tracking what you're alluding to here, if you really look back, some 30 years ago, you would be hard pressed to find a yoga studio anywhere. And now you'd be hard pressed not to find a yoga studio on every corner, because people realize this works. So what was once considered kind of fringe voodoo is now really substantiated as a profound avenue for physical health, for psychological healing. Same sort of thing with meditation. Meditation was really, how many people 25 years ago even heard of the term? And now with all the studies being conducted around the world, some over 500 studies a year now, many of them federally funded, showing the really breathtaking benefits of mindfulness practice. And I believe in a highly analogous way, lucid dreaming is catching up to that. And because it's a little bit more subtle, you're working with states of consciousness that are increasingly more subtle. So the progression from yoga to mindfulness to something like lucid dreaming makes a little bit of sense to me, going from a little bit more gross to refined to very refined. And just as our sister traditions of yoga and mindfulness have kind of gained some traction, stability in the West, to me, when I kind of look into through the lens of the future possibilities, that it could be as revolutionary as these other disciplines. And I'm kind of hanging my hat in that arena. So again, one reason why I'm excited to continue to present it. So yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities between those.
Maybe this is also an opportunity to say something about, so the practice that you're teaching alongside lucid dreaming is called dream yoga.
Right.
You referenced that this has its roots in Buddhist traditions, yoga, and the yoga that happens on every street corner, and the meditation that happens maybe on every other street corner.
Sure. Well, you can play on the word yoga here in two ways. Yoga, as colloquially understood or referred to sometimes, as simply stretching. So here I sometimes playfully talk about dream yoga as ways to stretch the mind, to stretch consciousness into previously unconscious domains. So it has that kind of colloquial application of stretching. But even more fundamentally, yoga as yoke, as in to unite or to join, the spiritual component of lucidity, which of course is dream yoga, that can facilitate yoking, uniting with deeper aspects of our own being, the subtle dimensions of our body and mind. And then parenthetically, I have to say ever so briefly that there's even one step beyond that, of course, which is sleep yoga, which is maintaining full awareness in the deep dreamless state. And that's really yoking, according to not just Buddhism, but Hinduism and other wisdom traditions. That practice yokes you, unites you to the very core of your being. So I think it's yoga in both those senses. There's more than just physical yoga as we know it. There are mental yogas where you're working with your mind, and you could almost say taking various mental postures as a way to really expand our sense of awareness, our sense of identity, and then fundamentally our sense of reality. What is it that fundamentally is real? And so, where you could say on this deepest sense is where these practices can unite us or yoke us or stretch us to what reality actually is. And this, of course, is where we get into the deepest aspects of these traditions, where they fundamentally become not just the mere entertainment value of superficial levels of lucid dreaming, not even the mental physical benefits of classic lucid dreaming, but talking about how to use the medium of our sleep and dream as a way to explore the nature of mind and reality. And that's really quite exciting for me, because as far as I can tell, that's the entire trajectory, it certainly is, of the Buddhist tradition, describing mind and reality, and then aligning ourselves with that truth. So dream yoga certainly has the potential to introduce us to these deepest aspects of ourselves and to the deepest aspects of reality. And these are some of the things, this kind of intimates the bandwidth of material that we'll be covering in the program, like at SMC, going from entry-level understanding of what this practice is, obviously a tremendous introduction to the actual induction techniques. How do you become lucid? What are the challenges behind lucidity? Why for some people is it so difficult? And then starting from then, going all the way through these more refined aspects of classic dream yoga practice. What are the stages of it? Some suggestion of sleep yoga. And foundationally, Travis, it's really akin to one of the analogies I use quite commonly is it's like when you first step out from a brightly lit room into the night sky, initially you can't see anything. It's just pitch black. In a certain sense, we're blinded by the light. And we could talk a little bit more about this, the kind of the shadow element of wake centricity, how we're literally blinded by waking consciousness, thinking that this is the only way to perceive reality. But as you keep your eyes open in the dark, as we all know, your pupils relax and you start to see things that have always been there, but you've never seen them before because they've been shrouded by the darkness. And of course, darkness really in this world is a code word for ignorance. So by keeping your mind's eye open, which is what these practices are designed to do, just like keeping your physical eye open in the dark, you eventually start to see things you've never seen before. All these unconscious dimensions of your being that really rule the vast majority of our so-called conscious lives. And this is, again, suggests where the kind of the liberation qualities of this practice come about, because you can start to see these deeper dimensions that whether you know it or not, and this is completely resonant with Western psychological thought, whether you know it or not, and that's really what non-lucidity in its larger context means, is not knowing it. These unconscious elements, they control a very large part of our lives. So you start to see how it has a deep kind of psycho-spiritual application that really, in fact, is very practical. I mean, there are insights that come about from these practices that have immediate applicability to how we live our daily lives. So as I often say, lucid dreaming leads to lucid living. That's really the point. I mean, we use the medium of the dream as a way to explore the nature of our waking reality. And it's almost doing it in this highly beautiful, rarefied, distilled way. But you don't just leave the insights tucked into the darkness of the night. The whole purpose is to take these insights and, pardon the play on words, but bring them to outside, to take the gold, this natural resource within us, and then bring it into the light of our daily lives. And this I can say from my own experience is why I encourage people to explore it, because yes, you'll learn how to lucid dream, you'll have a great deal of fun, you'll learn all these wonderful ways to work with your nighttime mind, but the real benefits come when you realize the same mind is expressing itself in two different domains of experience. And by taking the insights from the nighttime mind and extrapolating them, applying them to your daytime life, you start to realize the vast potential behind this type of exploration. So,
since you brought this term up, and it seemed like maybe there was more to say, wake centricity.
Yeah,
Much what you just covered there, but what else might you say about that notion?
Yeah, well, a lot. I mean, it's like whether we know it or not, and that's again what these practices reveal. Non-lucidity is not knowing, not being aware, and there's a lot that we're not aware of. And one of the things that we're not aware of is this unwitting allegiance to wake centricity, thinking that waking consciousness is the only way to perceive reality. And I'm doing a lot of writing on this these days because it's so compelling in some of the books I'm working on. But wake centricity alludes to, or intimates several things. It suggests a type of egocentricity, because the ego is really only fully operational and online in the waking state. And it playfully loses its footing, ego loses its footing as we slip and fall into sleep. And so what ego unwittingly or somewhat unconsciously does is that then it appropriates waking consciousness as the only viable way to view reality, because it's the only viable state that is fully operational. And then it dismisses other states of consciousness as unrealistic, unviable, simply because it doesn't have the traction to experience those states. It's a little bit like how when science goes bad and turns into scientism, the nobility of science shifts into slips into the ignoble aspect of scientism, and then science colonizes all other domains of knowledge acquisition, like spiritual knowledge and that sort of thing, simply because science hasn't experienced it. And so we talk about dream yoga. The moniker is the measure of the path. And just like in psychological theory and thought, dreams are truth tellers. And so this revelatory aspect is very truth-telling. It shows us how ego colonizes, dominates all other forms of consciousness, like the consciousness that we have in the dream, let alone the awareness we have in the dreamless state. It dismisses it because it can't fully experience it. And that's quite an irony, because according to these spiritual traditions, it says, Ramana Maharshi once said so beautifully, the great Indian sage, that which does not exist in deep dreamless sleep is not real. So what we, from a wake-centric point of view, dismiss, and when we say, oh, it's just a dream, in the Western world, that's a pejorative statement. It's a dismissive statement. Oh, it's just a dream. It's just a dream. So it's categorically dismissed. Well, Advaita Vedanta, Vajrayana Buddhism, they say, well, be careful here, because perhaps, and we invite you to examine this for yourself, you might discover that the dream state, if you are lucid to it, perhaps is more real. The deep dreamless state, if you can retain consciousness in that, is in fact even more real. And so this is really the realization that the Buddha discovered when he woke up. The Buddha is the awakened one. And I would argue that what he woke up is this incredible irony, the paradox, that so-called waking reality is the most dualistic, the most reified, the most asleep of the three states of consciousness. If you take this world to be solid, lasting, and independent, which is one way to elaborate on duality, if you see this world dualistically, which of course for us we all do, you're asleep. And this is what the Buddha woke up to. I mean, he challenged this axiomatic, this assumption that we are now awake. But he said, well, let's take a closer look at this. We're actually the most asleep in this so-called dualistic state. And of course, this is why we suffer. And so again, by exploring how mind expresses itself in these more refined dimensions, lucid sleeping, lucid dreaming, you start to realize a more equanimous way of relating to mind and reality, a more democratic way, that these states of consciousness are fundamentally at their deepest levels, they're all, you could say, equally real or equally unreal. And these practices allow you to discover that. And then by so doing, by stripping away our blind allegiance to wake centricity, we become, you could say, polycentric, which is the same as saying non-centric, which means you then can glean insights, deeper insights into the nature of how mind expresses itself across the spectrum, from complete formlessness in deep dreamless sleep to subtle form in the dream state to gross form in the waking state. You gain insights into how mind manifests itself in all these different dimensions of experience. And then that allows you a greater sense of freedom. You're no longer so ensconced in the display of waking reality, which is then seen to be in what the Buddhist tradition refers to as the really just the waking dream. In its deepest sense, dream refers to any manifestation of mind. And what we do with these practices is we explore a dream. Sometimes it's referred to as the example dream. We explore the manifestation of mind in the subtle dream state as a way, in this highly rarefied venue, to explore how mind manifests in the so-called waking state. And so as we wake up, again, lucid living, lucid dreaming leads to lucid living. As we wake up to our dreams, we use that example awakening as a way to gain an intimation of what it might mean to wake up spiritually in this so-called waking reality. And so again, this suggests, Travis, the deep, vast spectrum of applications from entertainment to full enlightenment. And so somewhere within there, we can continue this exploration. So Something like that.
Yeah, and I know another notion that's coming up in your recent work is that of broad spectrum and integral approach. Is that what
Yeah.
you're describing there?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, one of the amazing assertions is that there are two ways to look at non-lucidity, non-lucid dreams. Actually, let's put it this way: there's two ways to look at lucid dreams. One is that lucid dreams are the type of dream that we can train ourselves into having, and this is the more conventional approach. You learn the induction techniques, you study these systems, and we will spend a lot of time, of course, in this program doing just that. So with training, you can start to have lucid dreams. A more foundational approach to lucidity that is really the contribution of the East is that, believe it or not, lucid dreams are actually the natural state of dreaming. It's a natural type of dream. So if a sage dreams, for a sage, all their dreams are lucid. So if that is in fact the case, and I would strongly argue that it indeed is, then the question becomes, how did we become so non-lucid? How did we become so lost in the display of the mind? And I've done a historical analysis, kind of this integrated approach, seeing all the different factors that come about in the kind of evolution of this non-lucid kind of way of relating. And so a broad spectrum or integral approach to me is profoundly helpful. It's like what Sun Tzu says in the classic Art of War, know your enemy. Know the force of the dark side. Understand the force of the dark side. Understand what it is that we have been unconsciously trained into. Our culture trains us into non-lucidity. Our society trains us into non-lucidity. We are unwittingly practicing non-lucidity all the time, which of course is why we're so good at it. And the natural consequence of that proficiency, of course, is non-lucid dreams. And so by understanding how we fell asleep and continue to keep ourselves asleep, by understanding the force of the dark side of the enemy, so to speak, then we can start to use a broad spectrum integral approach to start having these dreams. And in my experience, this is tremendously helpful, because otherwise, in the West especially, we fall into what sociologists refer to as single action bias, which is where we think, oh, just do this one thing and you'll become lucid. Just take this gadget, do this one thing. It's kind of an egoic predisposition to find the pill, the silver bullet, the magic, one solution to the issue. Well, using the fundamental tenets of good science and good spirituality, reality isn't that tidy. Reality is multifactorial, systemic, complex. And so what I try to do now with my approach, because I've been working with this for decades now, the single biggest problem with lucid dreaming and dream yoga is having lucid dreams. It's very easy to proclaim these remarkable benefits, but expectation is often the antecedent to disappointment, because if you don't take a broad spectrum approach to understanding lucidity and then practicing it, you're guaranteeing your frustration. And so what I try to do now is basically honor the complexity of the issue. So we work with first person, like phenomenological processes, working with meditation, working with induction techniques. We talk about diet. What are some of the kind of physiological aspects, the biology behind bringing about certain states of sleep and dream? Because what we eat affects these states of mind. How do the social components come into play? How do the cultural components come into play? And so by then creating, field of dreams, like in the movie, if you build it, they will come. If you toil this field, if you build this field, the dreams will come. And this is why, again, I try to bring this more realistic, honest approach to understanding non-lucidity, therefore converting that into lucidity. And then by so doing, when you have this field of dreams created, then lucidity becomes a natural, spontaneous consequence of that. That's the way you can have honest success in this practice. But otherwise, this stuff has been around for a long time, and people still continue to struggle because I believe they're overemphasizing just one particular bandwidth of practice. And even historically, the Buddha knew this. I mean, when he described his path to spiritual awakening, he talked about it classically as the eightfold noble path. It wasn't one fold. It's not just meditation in this regard. Meditation by itself is not enough. So even in the Buddhist context, the Buddha knew this. So what we do is, again, more in resonance with the Buddhist teachings and good science, is we honor the complexity of reality, and we bring, so to speak, a full eightfold approach using that paradigm, or a full broad spectrum integral approach. And to me, it's more realistic, it's more honest, and if people engage in this kind of broader approach, lucid dreams are a natural consequence of that type of approach, and that's the tack that I currently take. So, long-winded answer to a great question, one that I think is, pardon the play, integral to having success in this practice.
Yeah, that seems really, really helpful because as we talked about in the last interview, when you start talking about the implications of dream yoga and we're dropping into the nature of mind, which is, and becoming familiar with that is going to allow us to navigate the after death state and all of this, and it could sound really romantic and exciting, or like really terrifying. And so to bring it into well, how does this look for somebody who's just kind of beginning, and is there a sort of natural progression path forward? And that sounds like what you're describing, which is
yeah, again, exactly. That's really well said. There is definitely a practice. There is a path. There is a way to work with it. There are ways to, you start with increasing dream recognition, increasing dream recall. There are ways to kind of systematically work your way into lucidity. And so by understanding, again, the force of the dark side, you start to realize how you can work your way back into it. And the really good news, and that wonderful analogy to classic nighttime literal sleep, is that because lucidity truly is the natural state, and just like falling asleep, it takes a lot longer to fall asleep than it does to wake up. So you can be asleep, and mixing metaphors here, you walk into a cave that's been dark for 1 billion years. You take one flick of a match and you can illuminate the darkness of 1 billion years in an instant. That's lucidity. Sustaining that lucidity, that takes practice. But illuminating that lucidity and having that insight, having that dream, that can happen in the flash of one moment of recognition. The very next time you go to sleep, it can happen. And for people who have had, this is the other very exciting thing about these practices, for people that have had lucid dreams, especially what I call hyperlucid dreams, because lucidity goes across a bandwidth from very short, almost like dreamlets, very 2 or 3 seconds of lucidity, which is a viable form of lucid dreams. Also lucid dreams that are kind of barely lucid, you think you're awake, but not quite. They go from that all the way to hyperlucid dreams that can last well over an hour, and the dream seems more real than your waking reality. You wake up from that, and this seems like the dream. And so, by understanding that broad spectrum and then applying these methods, once again, you can, and I lost my train of thought, you can remind me where I was before I strayed into the bandwidth thing. There was something else I wanted to say there, but it slipped my mind. But yeah, the idea is, yes, there's a systematic, progressive way to go through this training, and to realize that one moment of recognition, this is what I was going to say, because these practices and these states of mind are so foundational, especially when you have a hyperlucid dream experience, let alone a lucid sleep state, it's slightly akin to people that have a near-death experience. You're touching something so foundational, so transformative, that you don't have to have a near-death experience over and over to change your life. I mean, I just did a program 2 weeks ago where a gentleman had a very profound near-death experience years ago, and it completely, I'm sure we've heard these stories, it completely transformed the entirety of his life. And why was that? Because he saw something irreducibly foundational. He saw something that was a total shapeshifter. And I can assure you, the deeper levels of these nocturnal practices lead you to very similar states of mind. And I say this as a way to encourage people that you don't have to have these types of dreams every single night. You only need to have a couple hyperlucid dreams or a lucid sleep experience, and it can shape shift every dimension of your experience, just like a near-death experience does, because you know when you come out of that you have just contacted something foundationally real. And that's really quite encouraging that you touch into that one experience the very next night. It can be a game changer for you.
Mm.
So,
Thank you. Yeah. And it sounds like in the program that you'll be leading at SMC, definitely there'll be ways of introduction and beginning and cultivating. One aspect of this retreat that hasn't come up yet is the presence of a cognitive scientist.
oh yeah, exactly, right, very cool.
But who will be bringing a virtual reality component in.
Yes, yeah. Thanks for reminding me. So a cognitive scientist approached me, and I love working with scientists. I've worked with Stephen LaBerge. In fact, I think the last program we did together at SMC was with Stephen, and he's, of course, you could say, the father of Western lucid dreaming. He's one of the people that scientifically proved it at Stanford. And so I've worked over the years with a number of different scientists, and cognitive scientists reached out to me to suggest the possibility of coming up to SMC and doing a very informal and quite beautiful study working with virtual reality devices, things like Oculus Rift and others, as a way to suggest connections between lucid dreaming and virtual reality. And then, of course, implicating those two to this, what perhaps is this? Is this, in fact, a virtual reality? So I leave that as an open question for now. But so the scientist is going to come up, and people who are interested, so I did this study myself with him, can experience virtual reality if they've never done it. It's pretty powerful. I mean, experience virtual reality. I can see why there's so much buzz around this particular technology these days. And so the scientist is going to come up with an associate, and we're going to allow people who are interested to engage in this little virtual reality experiment. And then he will talk a little bit about how this dovetails into lucidity and why, in fact, are we bringing lucid dreaming to help explore this idea of virtual reality. So I had a chance to experience this myself, and I can only say it really, Travis, it lends an increased dimension to this particular retreat, because he's going to talk about it. You get a chance to experience it. I will then come in and talk about how it relates to lucidity and the nature of mind and reality altogether, and how it is that when you have an experience that is so real, knowing it while you're having that it's not real, then what are the implications to, you could say, the metaphysics or philosophy of mind and so-called waking reality altogether. So what it helps you do, and I don't want to say too much now, but it helps you dislodge this kind of exclusive identification with one particular state of consciousness, again, this kind of allusion to wake centricity, and then it helps you shapeshift and, in a very real way, soften our relationship to daily reality. And this is a great kind of segue towards where these practices culminate is, one of the reasons we suffer spiritually, one of the reasons we suffer practically psychologically in life is because we take things so bloody solidly real. It's, instead of the enlightened view, this is the endarkened view. This is endarkenment. This is living the world in this reified way. Reify means to impute, to make things real. We do this all the time. When we take a dream to be real, that's the definition of non-lucidity. We're unwittingly reifying the contents of our mind as they're expressing itself in the dream form, and we therefore get lost in that reality. We think the dream is real. That's the definition of non-lucidity. And we suffer in direct proportion to this level of reification. And so what these practices do foundationally is they bring about a way to relate to the world in a much softer, more flexible, malleable way. And the popular saying, blessed are the flexible, for they are never bent out of shape. And so this is the flexibility that this mental yoga brings about. Your mind becomes more open, more pliable, more workable, more malleable. And what in life doesn't benefit from that? And so as your mind softens, your relationship to the contents of your mind softens. This practice brings that realization about. A natural consequence of that is your world starts to soften in kind. We don't see things the way they are. We see things the way we are. And so these are the deeper philosophical implications that we also explore. And so wonderful way to kind of come to some of the conclusions of these practices, that as your mind softens through this practice, your world softens, becomes lighter. The endarkened view is replaced with an enlightened view. And so the same, just like in a dream, the same contents of mind and reality continue to arise and display, but your relationship to those contents changes dramatically. And so that means you can still take things seriously without taking them so literally. And in so doing, then you can relate with a greater sense of wisdom and perspective and compassion, because you're no longer so entrapped, so embedded in the contents of your experience. Again, that's exactly what defines non-lucidity. And so as we see this process played out within the context of our dreams, once again, we take those insights from that process that we experience in the laboratory every night as we dream, and then we take them into our daily lives and we go, well, how is this any different from that? Same mind, different medium of expression. And that's no small thing. That's a foundational way to work with the entire trajectory, at least as I've come to understand it, of the Buddhist path, in a beautiful, rarefied, distilled way every single night, taking those insights, bringing them back into your daily life, lightening. This a lit dream is a lucid dream. A lit life is a lucid life, and that's a life where you don't take things so seriously. You don't reify. You don't create the world in this way. So I often say we freeze the world in our own image, which is the egoic image of seeing things as so bloody solid. The world, this is not the nature of the world. This is the nature of the ego. And so ego projects these qualities onto the world. We freeze the world into concrete and steel, and then we wonder why the world is so hard. It's because we're the ones that make it so. And this, of course, is a foundational teaching of the Buddha. We're not victims of a reality. We're victims of the way we project and impute our reality. So this is another thing that we talk about when we talk about the co-construction of this world. And this dovetails very beautifully into an integral component of what we'll be doing, is exploring the daytime practice of what's called illusory form, which is a wonderful way to take a kind of a diurnal or daily practice, see the world in this more fluid, dreamlike way. And then that creates a very elegant kind of daytime preparatory practice in addition to meditation and the other induction techniques to help us bring about increased lucidity at night. So again, a long-winded, but you're asking some great questions, and I'm hoping this portrays some sense of both the playfulness of this material, the profundity, the depth, the vastness of it. And as I said, I've been exploring this with some rigor for some 20 years. And it's because I'm keeping my eyes open in the dark longer and longer. The more I keep them open, the more I see. And the more I see, the more excited I get, because there's an entire dimension of reality that is waiting for us every single night when we fall asleep that the West just categorically dismisses. And the wisdom traditions say, why not use these states of consciousness as a way for psychospiritual and even physical development? And truly, I don't see it as an exaggeration to proclaim, as I mentioned at the outset, that these practices do represent the pedagogy of the future. This is truly higher education. And I feel like I'm in the midst of some really exciting developments along these lines. So yeah, that's my spiel, man. I'm sticking to it.
I love your spiel, and I love being in the retreat space itself. The implications are vast, but just like just 4 or so days up on the Shambhala Mountain Center land, which is itself magical and dreamlike,
Really,
with these practices, with these teachings, childlike play, fun, are definitely qualities to this alongside, the profundity.
That's a great thing to say, Travis, because, and again, this speaks one more time to the broad spectrum of this. Because on one level, man, this stuff gets really deep. It gets really profound. But yet, on a level you just completely mentioned, it is a total gas to work with this kind of stuff. I mean, it is really fun. And as you alluded to, a consequence of this is a more enlightened, childlike way of looking at this world, where when you do see things more they truly are, they manifest in this more dreamlike and illusory way. And I define with great detail, what does that actually mean? What does it truly mean to say that this world is illusory? It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means, illusory has a very specific definition. It means the way it appears is actually not in harmony with the way it truly is. And so to wake up to that is what these practices are about. And the natural consequence of that is one of sheer delight, because you're waking up to a world that is now lighter and freer and more open and more expansive. And a natural consequence of that, especially in the context of Shambhala Mountain Center, which is such a sacred space, is you enter a domain of mind and reality that is completely delightful to work with. And so, I'm glad you were able to bring that in, because, we explore some serious material, but fundamentally, you come out of these programs with a sense of release, dropping the burdens of reification, dropping the burdens of solidity. And the natural consequence of that lightening up, deeply connected to the process of enlightenment, playing on that word, is in fact a sense of levity and delight and play in the world. And again, it's no small thing. It's just really fun to work with.
Well, I'm sure looking forward to it. I'm not sure is there anything in particular about the treat that didn't come up? I think we painted a good picture. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, well, the way the program's actually structured, obviously we work through a number of different classic kind of didactic presentations where I talk about things. I've got some fantastic videos. Over the years, I've collected just really cool stuff. Dreamlike, illusory, fun things, some cool science videos. And so we juxtapose that with some daytime meditations, practices that are designed to increase lucidity, the practice of illusory form. What actually is that? How do you do that? We explore that in great detail, discussion groups, little breakout things, formal practices of napping. I mean, my favorite practice in the afternoon, formal session of napping practice and working with what are called the hypnagogic and hypnopompic states, the very interesting pre and post dream states that are, in my experience, kind of highlighted when we nap. How to work with those things as a way to bring about, parenthetically, is a way to install a kind of dimmer of consciousness. In the West, we're either awake or asleep, dead or alive, black or white, on or off. Well, why not refine the mind? Take the light switch of the West and replace it with a dimmer. Maintain a few photons of awareness from the wake-centric state as you descend. Dim that awareness, dim it, dim it, dim it. Don't just turn it off, and then maintain awareness. So I show you how to do that, playing with these hypnagogic and hypnopompic states, which are so much fun. And then the component with the illusory, with the virtual reality thing. So it's really, again, using this kind of integral broad spectrum approach. I bring in a lot of stuff from a lot of different schools of wisdom and knowledge. It's not just the great contribution of classic dream yoga as it's presented in the Buddhist tradition, but it's also the incredible sophistication of the West with its induction methods. And so, as I alluded to earlier, in resonance with this integral approach, I bring in all these different integral methods. And I think that's what makes it a little bit more colorful, lighter, honoring and incorporating this vast spectrum of skillful means from philosophy, from cognitive science, from psychology, neuroscience, and then, of course, the meditative traditions. And so we bring all these to bear in a very lighthearted yet rigorous way to show people the playfulness, the elegance, and the depth of this type of exploration. And that's why, I mean, I teach a lot of programs. I teach on death and dying, I teach on meditation. But I have to say, of all the things I teach and write on, this stuff gets me more excited than any, because it's like it brings everything to bear in a very playful, delightful, and yet profound way. And I don't know any other body of teachings that I've ever worked with that has this kind of juxtaposition of all these different qualities that make it really fun and fundamental. So that's why I get so excited about it.
Yeah, that delight definitely comes through, and it's such a joy to hear you teach on this and to describe your experience. So I invite those of you listening, watching, to consider coming up for this 4 days. It's going to be amazing.
It'll be fun.
May 17th through the 21st. May 17th through the 21st. Lucid Dream Yoga is the name of the program with Andrew Holecek. I will be there. And so will Andrew. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the hour to talk about this once again.
No, it's a delight. Yeah, I'll either be there physically or virtually. We'll see. Always great to spend some time with you, Travis. Great questions as usual, and I look forward to participating in this event with you and hopefully some of our listeners as well. So thanks for your time.
Great. Yeah, my pleasure. So a link to the program will appear just below wherever you're seeing this video, probably on the Shamal Mountain Center blog. Find the link, or on YouTube. It's down in the info section there. And you can also go to shambhalamountain.org and find this program and all of the other offerings. And please stay tuned to our blog and our newsletters and such for more stuff like this. And looking forward to seeing you up at Shambhala Mountain Center, hopefully sometime soon. Okay, have a nice day and night and in between.
Terrific. Dream on.
Okay.